Hello everyone! Today I thought that I would put together a simple video tutorial explaining how I make my iron-on patches. This is more of a patch tutorial, not an embroidering tutorial, so I won't go into too much detail regarding stitching the design of the patch, but rather the steps that I follow to make an embroidered piece of fabric into a patch. If you would like to hear more about how I make embroidery projects in general, I previously made an embroidery tutorial video which will probably answer a lot of questions that you might have. The first step would be to create the design that you want on your patch. I prefer to first draw it out on my iPad and then print it out to transfer it onto my fabric. I'm not entirely sure what exact size I prefer to have, so I print out multiple designs of differing sizes to see which size I like best in physical form. I then use graphite paper to transfer the design onto the fabric. This makes it much easier to stitch the patch as you won't be worrying so much about the placement of your stitch, but rather the stitching itself. It is easiest to transfer designs onto lightly colored fabric, so I chose a cream color, but it didn't really matter considering my design has stitches on top of the entire piece of fabric. If you're making a patch where some of the fabric is showing, you'll of course have to consider how this will affect your design. This specific type of transfer material is permanent, so I taped down my fabric and design pattern so they would not shift while tracing. I trace over the designs with a sharp pencil, but I also think that a pen could work too. I won't go into too much detail describing how I stitched the design itself, but I will mention the type of stitches that I used. I only used 3 types of stitches in this design. The brown lettering uses a satin stitch, the yellow uses a short and long stitch, and the final turquoise stitch I don't think has a specific name, but it basically just wraps around the edge of the patch, so I call it a wrapping stitch. All threads that I used were 1 strand of thread folded in half, so each stitch is 2 strands thick. Here is where I'll start going into more detail as I'm basically finished making the base design of my patch. By base design, I mean the design that is stitched through the fabric only and not the iron-on material. Everything that you stitch before ironing on the material falls into the category of base design. After you iron on the material that turns it into an adhesive patch, you will most likely only be stitching the edge that frames the patch. One big tip that I will give is to stitch all that you can before ironing on the material. Once you adhere the paper, you will not be able to use an embroidery hoop. Make it easier for yourself by leaving only the edge to stitch once you adhere the heat and bond. Heat and bond is the best material that I have used to make iron-on patches. It adheres very well and is easy to stitch through. If you are not familiar with this material, it is basically a sheet of paper that can turn into double-sided tape if you apply heat from an iron. Cut out a piece of the heat and bond paper that covers the sides of your patch and then place the rough side of the paper against the back of your patch. Using a dry iron set to medium to high heat, adhere the material to your patch by flipping over the patch a couple of times to make sure that it is firmly adhered. My preference for patches is to not leave any part of the heat and bond paper exposed, so I do a final stitch around the entire patch. To do this, you will have to remember to leave an exposed edge of the paper while cutting off the extra material. Once you have your design cut out, you will want to remove the protective sheet from the back before making any stitches. Start off your stitch by going up underneath the patch. This hides the knot and keeps the final stitch neat and tidy. Now this next part might seem a bit confusing, but I do this next step to make it much easier on myself. If you start off by going up from underneath the patch, then circling the thread around the edge, you will have to continue to start your stitches from underneath the patch. Since it is much easier to start the stitches from the top, where you'll be able to see where your stitch needs to go, make a stitch right next to the one that you just made. From here, you will be able to wrap the thread around the edge and make your stitches from the front rather than the back. You should use this step every time you start a new stitch with a new piece of thread. Once you have that step covered, you're pretty much done. Continue to stitch around the uncovered white material until you work your way all the way around the patch. To finish off your thread, cut off the thread 2 to 3 inches from the base and tie the remaining threads into a knot before cutting it off. And there you have it. I hope that this short video helps those of you who were curious about how I finished off my patches and helps you in future projects. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me on my Instagram account @BethanySpaniel and I'll be happy to help. If you are interested in this Luke's Diner patch from Gilmore Girls, it is available in my Etsy shop as well as other embroidery hoops and a wonder posters. As always, thank you all for supporting me and my art.